Welcome to Tanakh Talk. I'm your host, William Hall, broadcasting live from Kingsland, Texas, USA, with another episode of Controversial Issues with Rabbi Chaim Coffman from the Holy Land. Today's topic, sure to get some fire started. Why am I right and everybody else wrong? Rabbi, I'm thinking I might want to bail out of here now in case somebody just, sends a nuke my way. I'll be out of the way. Oh boy.
Listen, you're hooked up to me. You don't know what's going to happen to your system. So,
True.
That's
True.
it. We'll just start throwing the fire now, right?
Yes.
Fireballs now.
Exactly. That's all right, though. All right. So we're going to hit this thing off, and we'll just see where it takes us. Meanwhile, the concept of this, of course, is brought to you by Procter & Gamble. I'm just kidding. It's brought to you by, the whole idea that Orthodox, well, pretty much everybody thinks they're right and everybody else is wrong anyway. So it's not just Orthodox that think that. But that's the big push, is why is it that Orthodox thinks that they're the only ones who know what the actual truth is? So that's kind of where we're going to go with this and see how it goes. All right.
All right, pleasure to be here as always, and that's really the $1 million question. Why, everyone thinks, you have the monopoly, right? You have the monopoly on Torah, so how come you don't recognize a Reform conversion? How come you don't recognize, a conservative conversion? Why are these groups not up to snuff? Why can't you live and let live, etc.? So we get a lot of flack. All right, we get a lot of flack for that because basically the philosophy behind it is what people say, it's your way or the highway. But everyone says pretty much the same thing. Reform thinks they're right. Conservative thinks they're right. Certain Orthodox people think they're right. Even though people say, I'm open-minded. Nobody's open-minded, right? At least, till the brains fall on the floor. So, so we're going to look, at the other, we're going to backtrack. Instead of showing why we are, we the Orthodox are right, which we've shown over the last number of weeks, proof for God's existence, and, that proof for God's existence, proof that the Torah itself is true. Went through a number of proofs for that. So we're going to get to that, at the end. We're going to, sort of demolish, or, well, I shouldn't say demolish. We'll discuss these other so-called movements, and then we'll work our way up. Even though, last week we sort of spoke about orthodoxy, modern orthodoxy, etc. So we'll start with the easiest one first, right? One that we didn't mention that has probably the smallest amount of followers, and those are the Karaites. Can't forget about the Karaites, right? The Karaites believe, that they believe the Torah is true, right? The only thing is they don't believe in oral law. Right, so since they don't believe in oral law, they'll eat cold food on the Sabbath. They'll sit in darkness, and there are, how many followers really do the Karaites have? Right, someone pointed out to me that seemingly they're more than 50,000. Okay, I think it's a smaller number, but it doesn't really matter. Right, it can be 5,000, it can be 10,000, 50,000. 100% they don't believe in oral law, right? They take the Torah absolutely literally, and there are a lot of problems, obviously, with that. We've spoken about it a number of times, in different ways. A simple explanation, what they say is, the rabbis had to subtract to the Torah, right? That's their claim. They don't want to hold by oral law, even though the Torah in the book of Exodus, chapter 23, verse 2 says you go after the majority, means the majority for good. Who are the majority? The rabbis, right? And the book of Deuteronomy also speaks about the fact you have to listen to the Levites, to the Kohanim, of that generation and all generations. Who are the Levites and the Kohanim today? They're the rabbis, right? They have no choice. 80% of the Torah doesn't make sense if you look at it literally, right? Nobody knows what a sukkah looks like. No one knows what phylacteries are. No one knows what tefillin are. You need oral law. Right, you need oral law for the Messiah. That was my checkmate. That's how I got this, this great name of checkmate, because when you look at Ruth, it says that a Moabite can never convert, right? It can never come into the community of the Jewish people. If Ruth can't convert, you look at the book of Ruth, she's a Moabite. If she's a Moabite, 4 to 5 generations later, comes out King David. If King David's the Jewish Messiah, certainly the Christians also go back to King David. What do you do with that? Now, you need oral law. I know what the answer is. Karaites are never going to accept it. But you have to come up with an answer, right? Within Torah, within the prophets, somewhere, show me why King David is actually a Jew. So, regardless of all that, the Karaites themselves basically petered out. When's the last time, the Karaites had this major convention, turned the world upside down, Jewish law this, Jewish law that? They haven't done very much, right? So, they're a non-factor. They're pretty much a non-factor. They're much smaller than any other so-called group. So we'll just take them first, and the fact that, let's say, for argument's sake, there are 50,000 of them in the world. Okay, so I'll acknowledge, even if that's the case, they're not growing, right? They're basically dead. They are dead. They're not doing anything. They're not building communities. They don't have tens of thousands of people coming, expanding, and all that. Finished. Okay, so that's the end. That's the end of the of the Karaite. So now we'll start with reform. So we mentioned a few weeks back, how did the reform movement start? Their goal 100% was to uproot the Torah, right? Reform, one of the first things they did was they moved from, where the person leading the service, instead of being in the front of the synagogue, put him somewhere else. Then they started changing other things, and eventually you look at a reform prayer book today, it's totally cut up. Right? They may say a few things in Hebrew, probably not. Most of it is in English. You're going to say, oh, English, not so bad. But what was their goal? Their goal was 100%. We won. It's not about making Judaism relevant, right? That was really what the conservative movement wanted to do, bring Judaism into the 20th century. The reform movement essentially said, we want to uproot it. We want to do whatever we want to do. We don't care about Jewish law. We don't care about the rabbis. They're not interested. They're adding to the Torah. They're not adding to the Torah. They're telling you, you got to live in this world, and we can do what we want, right? And a lot of the rabbis don't keep Shabbos, right? They desecrate Shabbos, in public. Many of them are gay. They certainly hold by gay marriage, which the Torah says clear, right? Torah says absolutely clear. Gay marriage is forbidden. Got the conservative movement doing that also. They're just 10 years behind. Etc. So the reform movement, their goal, and again, my Rebbe will say that they're worse than anybody else because that's how they started, right? They started 100% to uproot Judaism. They took out of their prayer book going back to Jerusalem. They took out of their prayer book all about sacrifices, right? So, they said, we're very happy to be in Berlin. Well, when they made that statement, it's not a coincidence that that's where the Holocaust happened. Now, is that why the Holocaust happened? I'm not saying that's why it happened, right? But, if you start saying, oh, we're happy in this host country, we don't know, God forbid, we should say the land of Israel belongs to us, belongs to the Jewish people. Oh, forget that. We don't want to offend the nations. We're just like them. We'll be better than them. We'll intermarry. We'll go to their schools. We'll be in their armies, and all that came along the Holocaust. Instead, if you have Jewish blood, that's it. You had half-blood, quarter blood. They killed everybody, but they couldn't understand, right? Secular Jews couldn't understand. So their goal, more than 100 years ago, more than 20 years ago, their goal 100% was to say the Torah is not divine, was to say that we can do what we want. We can make things up. We can take things out of the prayer book. We can add things. You do all kinds of things. Now, what's the end result? Right? The end result, and we'll see by the conservative movement as well, the end result 100% is it's an absolute disaster. Why is it an absolute disaster? It's an absolute disaster because you have over 60% intermarriage rate. Why do you have over 60% intermarriage rate? Ignorance. Right? That's what it's all about. They don't learn, they can't learn the text. Their rabbis don't know how to learn the text. The story recently that I read that a person coming back to Judaism, and he was part of a Reform synagogue, and he started putting on tefillin, and the rabbi called him back to his back room, and he said, can you teach me how to do this? Now you're going to say, come on, you're exaggerating. Not exaggerating. Person told the story. It was his story. Right? Wasn't my story. I mean, I got plenty of story, I can tell. Maybe I'll share a few of them. Right? But this, how can you have somebody calls himself a rabbi, he's not messianic, so I'm not even going to go that far. Right? But even messianics probably know how to put on tefillin more than this person does. But how can you have someone who, first of all, he's a rabbi, we'll call him a rabbi for argument's sake, doesn't believe in God, right? Or doesn't believe God, God has the power to do things in this world. The Torah's man-made, it's not divine, and all that. How would he know how to put on tefillin, right? If he watched on YouTube, maybe he'd understand, right? If he didn't watch YouTube, how's he going to know? Because no one in the synagogue puts on tefillin, right? No one in the synagogue puts on tefillin. That's it. So in recent years, the Reform movement has come out and said we have to get back to tradition, right? They understood there's a cardinal mistake. And the cardinal mistake is they have more non-Jews than Jews, which is a major problem, right? But regardless of that, they're doing what they want. And if they do what they want, what tradition do they have? They make it up as they go along, right? It's not, it's not based in Torah. It's not based in Medrash, right? It's not, it's not based in, in Jewish philosophy. Not based in anything except what I want to do, right? And their goal, let's make no mistake, right? You can go back, to the preamble of what they wrote back in the late 1800s. Their preamble was, we are going to uproot Torah. They didn't say it exactly in those words, but they said, we are going to do exactly what we want to do, right? We don't care. We don't care, God's divine. No, we don't believe in that. Gay marriage, no problem. This, no problem. All these things that are forbidden, you have to keep kosher. No. Does a man have to wear a yarmulke, a kippah when he walks in the synagogue? No. You're going to read from the Torah twice a week? No. I don't have to do any of these things. So you can say, oh, but the rabbi said this, the rabbi said that. Okay, we'll get there, right? But all these things that seemingly are crucial, you pray together. They pray during the week. I grew up in a conservative synagogue, prayed once a week, right? Prayed Thursday morning when they read the Torah. Barely got, 10 men there, but, they consistently had, for years, they had this service. They had a service on Saturday as well, cut out half the service, etc. So, people can be picayune over here and they can say, oh, okay, so what's the big deal, right? So what if they took some parts of the service out? So who cares if they took out the Shema, right? Shema is the major prayer, right? Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You take on the yoke of heaven. How can you take that out? That's like pretty crucial. You take on the yoke of heaven, you take on the yoke of mitzvahs, right? You say, okay, if you have to ask Hashem Elokecha, you're going to love the Lord your God, you're going to do what he says. In the second paragraph, I don't do what he says, God's going to punish us. Oh, no, we don't like that. Doesn't fit our world outlook. We're going to scratch that, right? So imagine you take a major tenet, right? Maybe they say the first line, right? Maybe I'll cut them some slack. I'm in a good mood, right? Maybe they say the first line. And they'll say Shema Yisrael. Very good. They believe it. They believe God is one, right? What type of God do they believe in? Does he have the ability to punish? Well, why do terrible things happen, right? If God is all good, right? Why is there evil? Good question. Right? I'm not saying good questions, but if God didn't write the Torah, right? The obvious question, who wrote it? So they'll say, it was a committee. Right, the Wellhausen documentary hypothesis, 4 authors and a redactor, right? JEP and D. Go, check out academia. Everybody holds that in academia, except us, right? We're the only ones that believe God spoke to Moshe on Mount Sinai, and Moshe passed it down. What that speech was and how Moshe understood. Good, that's a whole discussion. But their goal, was not, was to make up their own tradition. We don't want to do this. We don't want to do that. Oh, this doesn't make sense, right? This idea of shatnez, wearing wool and linen together. If you have a sweater, person has a suit, a sweater, it says 100% wool. What do you have to do? Right? Torah says it's shatnez, you can't wear it. Okay, so what do you do? So there are people in communities who know how to check for these. How to check see if there's linen inside it or not. If there's not any linen, they check it good. If there is linen in it, got a problem. So I remember I had a family member bought my kids sweaters, and what did it say on the sweaters in the middle of winter? What did it say on the sweater? It said 100% wool. So, I thanked them very much. I said, hopefully it shouldn't be a problem. They said, what could be the problem? He said, there might be linen. I have to, I'll get it checked. I'll have someone check it, etc. So he said, but what's the issue? So I said, the Torah tells me I can't put wool and linen together, right? So they asked me why. So I said, it's the quintessential chok. What's the chok? It's a law we don't understand, right? Just like the red heifer. right? They took this cow, right? It's totally red, was never worked, never had a yoke on it, all these different things. They burnt it up. Person was impure. They sprinkled the ashes. The Kohen sprinkled the ashes on the person. The person became pure. The Kohen became impure. Makes no sense, right? That was one of the few things that King Solomon didn't fully understand. That is what we call a chok. Doesn't make sense, right? But we still have to keep it. There are laws that do make sense. Some make more sense, some make less sense, right? So I said, there's an idea that there are commands we have to do, which is, a lot of the commands in the Torah that don't make logical sense, right? This is one of them. This is not don't kill, don't steal, etc. We can come up with ideas about Shabbos and some other things, right? But most of it we don't really fully fathom, right? We have to look into it. We have to understand it. We still have to keep it, right? Bottom line is we still have to keep it. So this person said, well, if you can't give me a good answer, why are you not allowed to do this? Well, why would I ever want to keep it? So I said, let me ask you. I said, if I gave you 10 answers, 5, let's say I gave you 5 answers. Does that mean you're going to keep it? You can say, no, I don't like this answer. No, I don't like this answer. No, I don't like that answer. You can say, I don't like any answer. I give you 10 answers, right? But again, it's something that we don't fully understand, and they will say, well, if we do too much, we're going to offend the non-Jews, etc. We want them to like us. We don't want to be that much different. Who cares about being kosher? We'll eat whatever they eat. Doesn't really matter. So what's the end result? The end result is non-Jews are going to hate you more for trying to be more like them. You'll be reminded. God is not going to forget. He is going to remind you, 100% that you're still a Jew. And I told this story Saturday night that Rabbi Tauber, of blessed memory, was a child of the Holocaust. And there was an old man, came into the ghetto like right before the Russians came, and it's like the end of the war. And he's pulling out his hair, he's screaming, crying, going out of his mind. And they calmed him down. They asked him, so what's going on? They said, it's all my fault. They said, what happened? He said, I was living outside the ghetto. I'm a Jew. I was married a non-Jew. I have non-Jewish kids, non-Jewish grandkids, etc. I didn't practice anything. I don't know that much about Judaism and all that. And one night they decided they had a meeting, right? And in the meeting they said, hey, Grandpa, you're Jewish. Dad, you're Jewish. They said, yeah, but I'm just like you. We eat the same things. We do the same things. We're all the same. And they decided, no, you're not the same. And they turned him in. Imagine, a father, grandfather being turned in by his own family, right? Absolutely 100% boggles the mind. So, Rabbi Tauber says this is the end of the war. Doesn't make logical sense why this should happen. The Germans don't need another bar of soap, right? So Rabbi Tauber said, what was the point? What was the point of a 70-year-old man, right? 70-year-old man. Now, all of a sudden, the end of the war, millions of people have been killed. People, men, women, children, 1.5 million kids killed during the Holocaust, right? Absolutely boggles the mind. A 70-year-old man comes in at the very end of the war. You tell me he comes in the middle, came at the beginning, okay, right? Straddled along, they caught him, this, that, okay. The very end of the war, so Rabbi Tauber said, God's making a point over here, right? What's the point? The point is you can run, but you can't hide. You can say, I'm not Jewish. You can do all kinds of things. God's going to seek you out. God's going to reveal it. And, in some way, shape, or form. I don't want to digress here. But the point is that the more they are going to run away from Torah, they can call themselves Jews. I'm not saying they're not Jewish unless they aren't, right? Unless their mother's not Jewish, right? That's their claim against us. They, we're not Jewish. I didn't say you weren't Jewish. If your mother's not Jewish, then I would say you aren't Jewish, right? But we don't hold by patrilineal descent. We'll actually get into that a little bit. We don't hold by patrilineal descent. So it's not about the Orthodox saying, you're not Jewish, right? You don't keep Shabbos. You don't do this. You think we're looking for people to denigrate? We got our own problems. We got everyone denigrating us, putting us in lockdown, saying it's all our fault, blaming us for spreading the disease, all kinds of things. Just today, a bunch of red cities, what they call red cities here in Israel that, I put in lockdown, because there are too many infections. And now, some of them went, pretty far down. And they say, okay, now you're, a yellow city, which doesn't necessarily mean you can still go wherever you want and do whatever you want. Or if you're a green city, everything goes back to normal. But what did they say? They said, yeah, your numbers have gone down, but we're not changing. We're not going to change what we're doing yet because, whatever reason. Why? If the numbers have gone down and this is what you normally do, why is that different for us? We're denigrated everywhere, right? For I wouldn't say for better, for worse, right? For any number of reasons. Maybe, I'll touch on that also. But the idea is with everything that they do, their goal is simple. We don't want to go back to Israel. We don't want to rebuild the temple. We don't, we're going to sanctuarize same-sex marriage. We're going to do all these things that God doesn't want, but we don't care, right? We believe God's going to accept everything, and it really doesn't matter, even if it's man-made, etc. And the end result, we understand, is a disaster. So once they opened up that Pandora's box, there's no place to stop. They first wants to make women rabbis, etc. So they opened up floodgates at the very beginning. I mean, at the very beginning, they sort of took their time, right? They took their time a little bit, and then when they saw people started accepting, etc., then they started opening up the floodgates, right? So, basically, anything is permissible, and you can do whatever you want, and there are no repercussions for your actions because, again, the Torah is man-made. God forbid you say it's divine, and let's make clear a lot of these synagogues, they have a lot of money. The rabbis get paid a lot of money, and they're the ones, backing this whole thing. Here in Israel, you got the women of the wall, where you have these women once a month, on the new month, Rosh Chodesh, right? The first day of Rosh Chodesh, what do? They do something provocative. They go to the Western Wall. They have a place for them now to pray, etc. in egalitarian service, and they're the ones funding them. Giving them, tons of money to continue, trying to get Torah scrolls in there, all kinds of crazy things, right? So now, but if you would ask most Reformed Jews, what do you think about what's going on with the women of the wall? Guarantee you 9.9 out of 10 don't know what you're talking about. Why don't they know what they're talking about? Because they don't have a connection to Israel, right? I'm not going to say it's politics. What's going on in Israeli politics? I don't even go in there. They probably don't know anything about that either. It's okay. You say, I'm not into politics. Very good. Right? But if your movement is giving tons of money, supporting this whole thing, and trying to desecrate the Western Wall, the holiest place in the world, and you don't have a clue about it, what does that tell you? It means it's doing whatever they want, just be provocative, right? That's what they're doing. And, you see where a lot of their money goes. Even they spend money on education. It's horrific. They're busy planting trees here. They're busy giving, tens, hundreds of thousands of dollars to gay groups and all that. And obviously we hold that's forbidden, right? All these things are forbidden. Obviously there's going to be a clash. So you can say, oh, you don't think I'm Jewish. I didn't say you weren't Jewish. But if you're going to ask me, if you're going to say, well, Leviticus chapter 18, right? The same-sex marriage is forbidden. Do you believe that's a metaphor? Someone would ask me, do you believe that's a metaphor? No. Literal, right? The Karaite will be happy. They'll give me a round of applause. It's like, woo, go! Unbelievable. Look what he said. Leviticus chapter 18, right? It is 100%, we're taking that literally. So we're taking that literally. I cannot say, an Orthodox Jew cannot say this is okay, right? So yeah, so if, Reformed Jew says, well, we believe in that. So what do you think about that? I think it's wrong. Now, how are they going to take that? They may take and say, oh, so you don't think I'm Jewish. Now, that wasn't what was said. What was said is, I believe in the Torah. I believe that the Torah is true. So therefore, if God says it's forbidden, then you have a problem with God. Then you have a problem with what the Torah says. You want to say you have a problem with me? All right, a lot of people have a problem with me. That's okay. But I'm not the one who wrote it. So even if you say it's a committee who wrote it, let me ask you, what does Leviticus chapter 18 tell me? Right? Come on. Where's the Jeopardy theme song? Dee, dee, dee. What does it mean? What does Leviticus chapter 18 mean? No, it doesn't mean that. What do you mean it doesn't mean that? So what does it mean? The entire chapter is talking about forbidden relationships. Also talks about bestiality, other forbidden relationships. So what in the world is it talking about? It's talking about a forbidden relationship. So you want to say no, but, it doesn't really mean that. It's really not for that generation. Well, where does it say that in the text? Doesn't say anywhere. You just want to justify to do what you want to do. Conservatives know better, right? I'm going to knock them in a minute. They 100% are no better, right? They're just maybe a few years behind, reform. So therefore, they throw everything out the window. Whatever they decide to keep, they're going to keep, right? But their goal, let's remember, their goal is God did not give the Torah, right? That's the first thing. Second thing is it's man-made. I can change it whenever I want, right? We'll take a vote. Anyone in who says who wants to change it? All right, I'm in. Let's change it, right? So get a vote, change it, or whatever, whatever the case is. That's what they did. That's what they continue to do. It just goes further down, right? It's hard to imagine, how much further down it goes. I remember a congregant, in synagogue I used to pray in, this conservative synagogue once told me, or I once overheard them say, I don't remember if they said it to me specifically, but I remember them saying, when I walk in a Reform synagogue, I feel like I'm in church. So my answer was, so why don't you go to church? What's the difference? Right? It's in English. All right, they're not exactly, praying to JC, hopefully not. It's not a messianic place. But again, the mentality is skewed, right? It's totally skewed. It's all about doing what I want to do, feeling good about Judaism, and that's it. All right, so that in a nutshell, is the reform movement, even though, it was sort of innocuous, a few things at the beginning, what they decided to change, and then bam, then they start changing about not going back to Jerusalem and, kashrus and all these other things. Once they took one step and veered, even in a minor thing, this is, a tremendously important idea. Once you start to veer off a little bit, the Pandora's box is open, and they're going to say, oh, the Orthodox never want to change. They're never going to do this. They're never going to do that. Well, once you open it up a little bit, then you're in trouble, because then you're straddling lines that you don't want to straddle. And then you're going to get to a place where you don't want to get to. So that basically is the conservative movement. Let's speak about the conservative movement. The conservative movement I grew up in, and I studied by them, at least for a couple of years. So I certainly know them, very well. And I don't think it's gotten any better since I left more than 20 years ago. And when they started, in the early 1900s, they said, we're going to bring Judaism into the 20th century. Now, most of the rabbis there, when they started, they're Orthodox, right? So they wanted to make Judaism more modern. But what happened? What ended up happening is they started to pick and choose. They started to veer off from Torah being from heaven. Now, I took a class, I think it was my first year. I took a class in Jewish philosophy. And in the conservative movement, you can have all the way to the right to what we would call traditional conservative Judaism, or I guess what they call traditional Judaism. There is I remember many years ago, there was such a group, there was such an institution. It was the Institute for Traditional Judaism. I don't know if it still exists or not, but they were more traditional, right? They were still the left, I guess, the modern orthodoxy, but they were more traditional. You can have people more in the middle, and then you can have people all the way to reform, right? You can have people, you had Abraham Joshua Heschel teaching there, and you had Kaplan teaching there. He was the father of the Reconstructionist movement. So you can have almost all the way to the right, all the way to the left, and anywhere in between, right? It was a mind-boggling thing. I had to read all these different philosophical, positions. Franz Rosenzweig, we read about why bad things happen to good people. We read Kushner and all, remember all the things, that we read. We had to read Heschel, of course. We read a lot about him. We read Kaplan, read all these different things. And again, the movement was split all the way down, right? Some were more traditional, some less traditional, but at the end of the day, it was about picking and choosing, right? So they started off more traditional. So you can have a drop more respect, for that, but at a certain point, what ended up happening is they went further away from tradition, even though they claimed they still held according to Jewish law. one of their positions was that you're allowed that there was a minority opinion. The minority opinion was, let me say the majority opinion. The majority opinion is not allowed to drive to synagogue on the Sabbath, right? A minority opinion was, if you're going to drive, you only drive to synagogue and back. Now, if a person really, is a true conservative Jew, how many people do that? Okay, you tell me there are conservative Jews that walk to synagogue. Okay, right? I'm not going to argue that. There are some that do that. Certainly not the majority, not by any stretch, right? But there are some, that will do that, and others will drive. They say, well, what can I do? I live far away, so I have to go to synagogue, right? So going to synagogue be a Torah prohibition with all the different things of the Sabbath you're going to transgress. Praying with the minyan is rabbinical, right? So you're going to be over 20,000 transgressions, by desecrating the Shabbos in order to say, wow, it's so important for me to pray, to pray with men and women together, whatever it is. But that's only rabbinical. The only Torah obligation is to pray. That's my obligation. What I pray, when I pray, how I pray, that's all rabbinical. So you want to tell me I did 25,000, not me, someone did 25,000 transgressions for a rabbinic idea to pray? Come on, right? So obviously that went by the wayside, but what was the final nail in the coffin? The final nail in the coffin was, right before I got there, is that they had to vote whether to count women, as part of a quorum, right? Certainly the Orthodox don't. Reform didn't have a problem with it. They were still more, I would say, part of them was still more traditional. So what ended up happening? They let everybody vote. They let everybody vote who was part of the Jewish Theological Seminary, who taught there. They let everybody vote. Meaning, they let Hebrew teachers vote. They let history teachers vote. And they let, people in the Talmud department vote. Now, as it goes, they claim that had the Talmud department been, were the only ones to vote, never would have got passed. That law, according to them, never would have passed. But what happened? They let everybody vote. I mean, I think a few janitors also vote, those who voted fraud, who knows? Who knows who voted? But in any case, that split the movement down, absolutely down the middle, because you still had a traditional element. And I remember there were two distinct, minyanim services. One was downstairs, one was upstairs. The one that was upstairs was egalitarian. The one that downstairs was more traditional, right? So there was still that element. What's there today? I can't tell you, right? I can't imagine that, if there is a traditional element, someone will say, wow, there is, there are traditional people there. All right, how many? I can't imagine how strong it is, right? Because as generations go further down, the weaker we are, the weaker knowledge we have. In my day already, when I was there, the people they normally took, they accept as undergraduates, were from day schools, were from conservative day schools. Those are the ones, they really looked for. But they took other people also out of public school, etc. So it wasn't when I was there, it wasn't the same, right? It wasn't the same what it previously had been. Okay, but you want to tell me now it got more traditional? I don't think so. We're living in, absolutely crazy times. I think things have got 10 times worse. So even if there is, and again, someone will call me on it and say, no, there's still a traditional minyan. It's still there. Okay, right? Even if it is, I can't imagine it's thriving. Doesn't make sense that it would be thriving. But that's what's there. So I'll tell you an experience happened to me, and this is actually, I have to be thankful for that because, this is what pushed me, to want to learn more and see exactly what Orthodoxy was. I took a class, a famous class there. It's called Biblical Criticism, right? That's obviously they believe, in the JEPD theory, right? The Wellhausen documentary hypothesis. And they claim, and they say this with a straight face, it's kind of funny, and they claim this is the class, this is the course, it's either going to make you Orthodox or it's going to make you an atheist. Nothing in between, right? They didn't say, well, it's going to mess you up, psychologically or whatever, but they said it's either going to go, you're going to go one way or the other. So everyone has to take this class. You take this class. What's the first class? What do they tell you? The Torah itself, very holy, unbelievable holy, right? God gave it, God gave it at Mount Sinai, gave it to Moshe. All the Jewish people were there. I mean, they'll claim we don't know exactly what happened. It was an unbelievable experience, but maybe they were all divinely inspired. Okay, right? But they started at the very beginning, saying that the Torah is a holy book. They started at the end, this rabbi, quote unquote, at the end of the course said this book is very holy. In between, they compared the Bible to Shakespeare. They compared the Bible to all, to Hammurabi's Code. They compared it to all kinds of things, right? So what happened to the holiness? What happened to the holiness? You're going to say, well, it's interesting. I remember reading Babylonian text, about the flood, Gilgamesh, etc. Again, is there structure similarities? Are there theme similarities? Meaning that the Torah itself is not unique, or it may not be unique, right? My heretical side here coming up, right? Maybe it's not unique. Maybe even though it is the bestseller, right? The best-selling book of all time, maybe there are other things similar. And if these other things, quote unquote, predate it, so maybe you tell me the Bible's based on that, right? Maybe the flood story is based on Gilgamesh, not the other way around. All these things. So I sat through these classes, and the class that did it, I just, they want to make people think. Making people think is not necessarily a bad thing, right? Because, I heard the statement, it stuck with me for life, and that is 1% think, 4% think they think, 95% rather die than think, right? So most people don't think in general. I'm not going to say everybody, but most people don't think. So I was sitting in class half asleep one day. Professor gets up, and he's talking, and he says, well, if Abraham, our father, didn't exist, if he didn't exist, right, would you put on tefillin today or not? Right, that was the question. Would you put on phylacteries that a man has an obligation to put on every single day except Shabbos or a festival? Would you put on tefillin? So I'm sort of half asleep, right? It didn't really dawn on me. So what happened? So right after that, we go to lunch. So I'm in the cafeteria, and someone said, okay, you want, spaghetti, you want cutlets, and all of a sudden, it hit me like a ton of bricks. I'm like, what do you mean he didn't exist? What do you mean it didn't happen? What do you mean we're going to put on tefillin? And this Hispanic guy looks at me, he's like, you having a meltdown? Like, what's going on? All I said was fish, spaghetti, or cutlets. And I started like freaking out. I said, for some reason, I still believe that God gave the Torah to Moshe for some reason, and passed it down. But all of a sudden, bam, it hit me like a ton of bricks. So I found my professor. I said, what's the deal? I said, what in the world are you talking about? And I started asking him all these questions. I said, listen, I got office hours. You want to speak about it? So we had a whole discussion. He gave me some books to read, on the other side. And that was my spiritual crisis. Because when I saw that, and if you're gonna take the Torah, you're gonna chop it up. You're gonna say it's similar to Shakespeare. You want to compare it to Shakespeare. You want to compare it to Hammurabi's Code. You want to compare it to other things. And at the same time, you want to say it's holy. How can you do that? You're not gonna do that with the Quran. No one's gonna do that with the Quran. Certainly, you have your head chopped off. You do that. You gotta do that with the New Testament. Imagine, you go to one of the bishops, one of the higher ups, say, listen, I'm writing a thesis on the comparison between, Shakespeare's Merchant of Venice, and, Luke chapter 25, whatever, go through all these comparisons. You're going to sit there and take me seriously? Come on. Right. So when I was having this crisis, so a friend of mine had just come back from yeshiva, and I was telling him what was going on. He said, oh, this is the place you have to go. And that's how I got, that's how I got to Israel. That's how I got to yeshiva. But when you're asking questions like that, right, again, interesting topic. It's like the philosophical statement, can God make a rock so big you can't throw it? No. Why not? Because God's not limited. It's first of the 13 principles of Maimonides, right? If I know what I know now, I would have plenty what to answer, but okay. I didn't have the knowledge. So they'll make you think all kinds of things, break down your spiritual philosophy in order that what you'll say, oh, the Torah's not unique. Right? You come out of this class thinking, well, maybe the Torah isn't so unique, right? So what would I ask? What would I ask if Torah's not unique? Why do I keep it? Why would I do any of these things? Someone at JTS taught a class in Jewish philosophy. He says about a myth. It's an idea about a myth. Or quaint customs. What are the quaint customs? Why would I keep it? There's a conservative rabbi more than 15 years ago on the 7th day of Passover. And I wish I was there. I would have had a lot of fun. This guy's getting paid $1 million a year. $1 million a year. He's getting paid, gets up to make a drasha, gives the sermon, 7th day of Passover. And what does he say? Says something along similar to what I heard when I was in college, when I was in university. What did he say? He said he didn't speculate. He said, I'm telling everyone, 7th day of Passover, exodus from Egypt never happened. So if I would have been there, I would have raised my hand. I said, okay, so why do we eat matzah? Because they know it's a custom, it's a myth. No. But most of the book of Exodus, besides speaking about the tabernacle and the sin of the golden calf, speaks about the exodus from Egypt. Right? You got major chapters, 20 chapters, 30 chapters. You know, all these things we do go back to coming out of Egypt. We make Kiddush Friday night, coming back to Egypt. The whole evening service, we pray. It's about Egypt, about the miracles of Egypt. So many things built on one event in history. Not only that, what does the Torah tell me? Exodus chapter 20 verse 2. It says, Anochi Hashem Elokecha. I am the Lord your God. How do I know? This is the proof of God's existence. How do I know? Because he took you out of Egypt. He took you out of the house of bondage. If he didn't take you out of the house of bondage, he's not God by logic, according to this guy, right? So the question over there is, why don't you tell me better? Why you tell me he took me out of Egypt? Why didn't you tell me he created the world, right? We just read about creation, right, a few days ago on Shabbos. So why did you tell me that? The obvious question is, who was there? Nobody was there, right? Who can vouch that God created the world? Nobody. Who can vouch God took him out of Egypt? 3 million people. How do we know? One event in history, passed it down generation. There's the Passover Seder, right? There are many things everybody does everywhere. There are 3 matzahs, 4 cups of wine, cup for Elijah. There's what do you call it? There's horseradish, right? You're gonna have grain there. You're gonna have all kinds of things. Everyone's doing the same thing. Imagine you had 4 generations at the Seder. You had a great-grandfather, grandfather, a son, and the youngest son, right? So let's say you have an 80-year difference, right? Imagine that great-grandfather was once the little kid. So his great-grandfather, you're talking now 160 years before, right? Then his great-grandfather, talking another 200 years, right? So it's not that far. How many generations go back to Mount Sinai? It's 40 generations, 32 generations, right? Something like that. So that's not such a big leap of faith, but it's one event. If it's one event, okay, so now you say it's a big game of telephone. How do we keep all the same thing? Very good, but it's one event. How do we know God exists? Because he intervened in history. How do I know he intervened in history? Torah tells me. Even if you tell me it's man-made. The verse in Deuteronomy says, you're going to tell your son on that day. What am I going to tell him? What am I going to tell him? I'm going to tell him God took us out of Egypt. How did he know? Because his father told him. How did he know? Because his father told him. And if it didn't happen, normally a father's not going to lie to their child. Well, I don't know about today, but let's say they're not going to lie to his child. If you're not going to lie to his child, it is passed down generation to generation. Everyone makes the Passover Seder. Most people. Most Jews make some sort of Passover Seder. If they make some sort of Passover Seder, something must have happened. Because what are you saying over the Passover Seder? We were slaves in Egypt. Right? We were slaves in Egypt to Pharaoh. We escaped because God took us out. Go through the whole story. Right? We go through the Makos, go through the plagues, all these different things. One event. So this guy gets up. And says it didn't happen. It didn't happen. Well, that's a major tenet of Judaism. How in the world did you call yourself a conservative rabbi? I'm not going to call you a rabbi. I'm not going to call you anything, right? How in the world can you get up there with a straight face, not be embarrassed, and tell your congregants the exodus from Egypt is a myth? And it didn't happen. And that is the base of how the Jewish people become a nation. How do I know they go down? How many people go down with Jacob? 70. Right? How many people come out? There are 600,000 men between the ages of 20 and 60, not including women and children, that come out of Egypt. Right? So that's about 2-3 million people. That means 8 million people died in Egypt. But they went to Mount Sinai. They became a nation. That's what the Torah tells me. So how did they become a nation? How in the world did they become a nation? Doesn't make any logical sense. So what were they doing in Egypt? They playing tiddlywinks? What were they doing there? Okay, we understand they're building the pyramids, they're doing other things. Well, what in the world are they doing there if the Exodus didn't happen? So then you have to rewrite it. How are you going to rewrite it? Right? Even the bad translation, even King James says we were there. He doesn't say we weren't there. He'll say we're not chosen anymore. He'll say all kinds of things, mistranslations, whatever, but he's not saying we're not there. Right? So you have people in the movement, in the movement themselves. Ludicrous. It doesn't make any sense. So when I was becoming religious, someone asked me in the synagogue, my parents' conservative synagogue, they said, "Do you really believe in this? Do you really believe in all this?" He was there for social reasons. Okay. Right? He said, "Do you really believe in this?" I said, "Listen, I wouldn't have I ticked people off way back when. Imagine what I'm doing now, many years later." So I said, "What do you think? I would have alienated so many people if I didn't believe it was true?" Right? So, obviously I believe it's true, but even the laymen don't understand what it stands for. Because even what at JTS at the seminary, what they believe in, it doesn't get passed down because the individual rabbi does what he wants. That's the way it works. That is quote unquote tradition. In other words, they're outside of Jewish law. They're outside the parameters. Once they're outside the parameters, you can do what you want. So you're going to say, well, aren't they really like the Reform movement? Yeah, they're 10 years behind, right? Maybe a little bit less. But the way they started out, even though my rabbi will disagree, and he'll still disagree to this day, and he'll say that Reform is worse. Why is Reform worse? 100%, because that's the way they started. The way they started out to uproot Judaism, that's not how the other movement started. That is not how the conservative movement started. So when you have all these different ideas, people believe different things. People do different things. And you're going from one spectrum to another. Now, the only people that really understand what it stands for are the people that are there, people that study there. You ask the layman, what does it mean to be a conservative Jew? What's his answer going to be? I'm not Orthodox. That's going to be, and I'm certainly not going to be Reform, right? But do they understand what it means if they see the philosophy, if they break it down? Let me ask you, does this make sense? And most people are going to say it doesn't really matter. Whatever it is, you believe what you want. You believe what you want, right? These people do what they want. These people do what they want. So again, it's a whole hodgepodge. Whatever is going on, at their headquarters, doesn't necessarily trickle down. So people are calling their own shots, even if they have rabbinic ordination. They're doing what they want. Why are they doing what they want? They certainly can't learn. They don't know how to learn. Right? They're not, I was learning in yeshiva. There was somebody came there, that I knew. So I told them, I said, well, it's a good thing you're getting in real learning because you're never going to do it the rest of your life. So the person looked at me and says, oh, I figured I'd hear something like that from your mouth. I said, but I'm not kidding. I said, you're going to go back. You're going to finish your degree, quote unquote. You're going to be a rabbi somewhere. When are you going to learn? I said, when are you going to get the tools to learn? You're not going to have the tools to learn. Because it has to be passed down, right? It's a Rebbe-Talmud relationship. It's a rabbi with a student. You can't learn it on your own. Pick up a Talmud, learn it on your own. You can't. Very, very difficult to learn on your own, if not impossible. So then we get, because I know you're giving me another 45 minutes because my name is Singer, sort of. So as we go, we see that they're a little bit further behind, right? They're a little bit, let's say they're, a drop more traditional because they do actually pray a lot of things in Hebrew. But at the end of the day, what do? They carve up the prayer book also. Take things out, put things in, other things. So without even getting into politics, I'll tell you one other story, right? One other story. And someone told me that, in order to do anything in a conservative synagogue, if you're a non-Jew, you're not allowed to, let's say, take out the Torah, read a responsive reading, do any of these things unless you convert, right? It doesn't matter if it's good conversion, not conversion, whatever, but you have to convert. So what happened? They realized after more than 20 years, about 25 years, I think they told me, after about 25 years, they finally realized a lot of these people aren't converting. Most of the congregants are non-Jews because, again, the intermarriage rate is more than 60%. So if it's more than 60%, now what did they do? They decided that we're going to allow non-Jews to do things in the synagogue without conversion. Right? They can take out the Torah. They can read responsive reading. They can do all, different things. They can do different things. The person told me, and again, I'm just repeating the conversation. They're telling me, oh, what a terrible thing it was. That was total discrimination. I was like, but they're not Jewish. Even if I would agree if they went through conversion, the conversion was okay, fine. But they didn't go through conversion. If they didn't go through conversion, how can you let them do anything? They're not Jewish. What? I'm gonna walk into a mosque, and I'm gonna lead who knows what. If I'm not a Muslim, never gonna happen. Right? In the church, I don't think it's gonna happen. You're not gonna be given. It's just not. That's not the way it works. So when you play around with things, and you turn in my language, you turn it into a pretzel. You 100% turn it into a pretzel. Then the end result is what it is. So now someone's gonna say, but what if someone's really sincere? Someone really wants to convert. Okay, what are they learning? They when it comes to keeping the laws of Shabbos, what are they going to do? Are they obligated to keep the laws of Shabbos? According to them, no. Keeping kosher, they'll learn about it. Does that mean they're going to keep kosher? No, doesn't mean that. Some will, some won't. Maybe they'll think it's like, a 5-year option. They'll do certain things. Maybe they'll do other things later, right? So why do we believe in the last remaining moments? Why do we believe we're right? So you got to go back to all these videos we made about cosmology, showing that, that there is a God, first of all. Plenty of proofs that there is a God. That knocks out most Reform and conservative Jews. Even if they say we believe in God, it's not the same God. Why? Because they don't believe God has power. Why? Because suffering. People suffer. They say if God's good and God can do anything, why do people suffer? Okay, good question. It's a legitimate question. But at the end of the day, they believe the Torah is man-made, right? Reform, conservative, most of them believe 100% it's man-made. So that knocks them out for that. So what are they going to keep? What's their obligation? They're coming into a covenant. If you come into a covenant, what in the world are you keeping? Whatever you want. You read a few books, you'll dunk and everything, you learn maybe a little bit of Hebrew, and that's it. But what does the Torah tell me? See, they don't have proof at all to show me that the Torah is not divine and that the Torah is not true and that I'm allowed to pick and choose. The Torah doesn't tell me that anywhere, right? Forget about oral law, not in the prophets, not in the Torah. It doesn't say I can do whatever the heck I want. It doesn't say that, right? So why do they do that and why do they believe it? Because times change, right? And I can't even tell you, now that I just mentioned it, I can't even tell you how many times I heard it myself. People say you got to go with the flow. You got to go with the times. I don't know. Torah doesn't change, right? Even you want to tell me electricity, the rabbis had to decide in the last generation if electricity is like fire or not. That's not changing the Torah. That's seeing if it fits the criteria, right? That's something totally different, right? But if you're picking and choosing, just tell me, okay, I don't believe the Torah is divine. Okay, show me proof. Show me why it's not divine. Right? But most people, their argument is not going to be, in logic in the Torah. It's because, I'm married to a non-Jew. It's because, I don't want to change my life. It's because any number of things, right? But it has nothing to do with truth, right? People have to understand that's not where the question's coming from. They just want to justify 100% what they do. And people say, I don't have to keep kosher. No problem with trichinosis. Well, that has nothing to do with keeping kosher, right? At least not the last time I checked. So people are justifying 100% what they're doing, but they don't have any proof. They don't have any proof the Torah is true. At least the Christians come and say, okay, we got proof in the Tanakh. We got proof in Isaiah. We got proof in Jeremiah. We got proof in other places to show that your covenant's been broken. A conservative Jew doesn't even know what the covenant is. He doesn't know what it stands for. He doesn't know what his obligations are. Why? Because he's never been taught and he never learned. Right? His rabbi will say, don't worry about it. You're good. You're good in your heart. The typical cardiac Jew, right? Some will keep more, some will keep less. Many, once they're bar mitzvahed, that's it. Once they have that party, it's over. They don't come back to synagogue maybe once a year. Maybe they'll light candles. Maybe they'll do other things. A few other things. And it could happen for any number of reasons. But the onus is on them. Now, basically to end, so we're not looking down on them. We want them to see the truth. They're going to say, how do you know I have the truth? What do you mean, how do I know? It can be proven. It can be proven historically. It can be proven sociologically. It can be proven scientifically, right? There's God. God exists. How, many ways we can show it. And we can show the immortality of the Jewish people when they shouldn't be here. Many different ways we can show it. You want to look at the proofs? I'm not interested in proofs. I want to do what I want to do, and I'm not going to change. So we're not saying, well, be like God. You're going to die. We want you to see the beauty of the Torah, obviously, right? But the criteria, what you're looking at, what we're looking at, is totally different, right? So the final thing is, so why don't you recognize, if someone converts, you hold it's not valid. Well, what do they learn? What do they do? The rabbis, you have to have 3 kosher Jews, right? Go to a mikveh, body of water, whatever. 3 kosher Jews. Keep in mind, if you have 3 rabbis, let's say they're all men. I'm not going to discriminate here. 3 men, right? But they don't keep Shabbos in public. So they have the status of a non-Jew. If they have the status of a non-Jew, how can they sit there as part of your rabbinical court? They can't. Right? So the whole thing, they don't believe in God, or maybe they do. It's not a personal God. God can't do anything. God's got no power. It's all heresy. Right? So when I was learning, the first time I ever learned, and I was learning the Rambam and the laws of repentance in the month of Elul before Rosh Hashanah. Right? The Rambam is listing a whole list of people who are heretics. If you believe everything Moshe Rabbeinu says except for one verse, you're a heretic. If you believe the prophets aren't true, you're a heretic. The whole laundry list. And I sat there like shaking. And I sat there and I said, wait a minute. If all this is true, if this is what the Rambam says, you're going to say, okay, I don't know the Rambam's true. Okay, whatever. If this is what Maimonides says, and we hold by what Maimonides says, then how can you go back to learn under these heretics? They're heretics. Essentially, they're heretics. So what I did was, I was in a double degree program between Columbia University and the Jewish Theological Seminary. So I wrote a letter, that time was before email, right? BE, right, before email. And I wrote this letter, and I told them, can I come study there? And I'm going to leave there, whatever. And they said, yeah, not a problem. So I left. I wrote JTS a letter, said thank you very much, and I was out the door. But that was an unbelievable eye-opener. But when you look back at it, again, I only highlighted, many, many, many stories, because you're not going to give me time of day. But there are many, many other stories, crazy stories, that don't make any logical sense at all. But they'll say, what? You're a stickler for Jewish law? You want to go buy the book? Yeah, because the book is true. If the book isn't true, then okay. Then you can do it, you can do whatever you want. I was at a wedding. I'll just give one example. I was at a wedding, and they had the Jewish wedding. They had a ksuba, a marriage document, and you need 2 witnesses to sign. So one of the witnesses who was signing was a woman. Now a woman really is not allowed to sign. It's a technical issue, but okay, it doesn't really matter, right? But this woman signs, is signing, and she says, "I don't have a Hebrew name. I've never been given a Hebrew name, or I don't remember my Hebrew name." Right? So what happens is, just take a name. We'll just write, any name. Now, obviously I was religious at this point. So you got to say, okay, what's the big deal? So they gave her a name. She didn't have a name. If you're going to sign a legal document, this is what it is. A ksuva, a marriage document is a legal document of the obligation of a husband to his wife, right? He's got to clothe her, he's got to give her housing, right? He's got to give her conjugal rights, and the person signs on it, John, the son of Frank, or Debbie, the daughter of whatever. But that's not her name. That's not her name. If it's not her name, find someone else who at least has a name, has a Jewish name. I'm not going to say it's right in either case. Doesn't matter. Right? But you're going to say, well, I don't have a name. I don't have a Hebrew name. So what do I do? So you make up a name. But you don't have a name. It's going to be a little bit more formal. You're signing a formal document. You're going to sign a will. You don't have a name. What's your name? I don't know. It's like Evan Costello, who's on first. No, that's a shortstop. What's your name? Going back and forth. I don't have a name. What's your name? I don't know. What's your name? I don't know. How can you sign? How can you sign a legal binding document, right? A lawyer's letter, a will, anything. How can you sign any legal document without a name? Isn't that absurd? Come on, it's absurd, right? It just reminded me of that, story. But there are many, many, many other, other examples just according to pure logic. Forget about oral law. Forget about anything else. When you look at it, you have to be thinking and say, what in the world's going on? So they'll say, this is what I want to do. And, oh, you don't accept it. You're only 10%. Yeah, but the problem with any of these movements, right, especially with the Karaites, is what? These movements, you have 60, 70, 80% into marriage, right? In certain places, 80, 85% into marriage. So I would say, even if I would agree with all these different philosophies, all these things that don't make sense, what is Coffman's law? Many people know you got to be able to pass it down. Statistically, if you can't pass it down, and Judaism states, everyone will agree, even if it's man-made, that the Torah is supposed to be passed down. It's supposed to be forever. Because, it was a good try. We really tried. What can we do? It didn't work. God says it's forever. Even if it's man-made, he said, well, it was a good try. Maybe they didn't really mean forever, right? But if you're going to have that level of intermarriage, even if I would agree, you're allowed to turn the Torah into a pretzel, which you're not allowed to. Even if I would 100% agree, you can't, doesn't work. If it doesn't work, then what do I care what your philosophy is? It's not about, I think I'm right and you're wrong. I mean, that is true, right? But the onus is on you to prove me wrong. I know I have the truth. I don't have any doubts, right? But over here, you have such serious doubts. By us, there's 95% success rate, or more to the next generation. There is a dropout rate. I'm not going to say not, right? There is a dropout rate, but it's not 85%. It's not 60, or let's say 60%. I'm sure it's higher today, right? I'm sure it's higher. So it's 60%, 6 out of 10 people dropping off the face of the map, spiritually, right? That's horrific. That is the war that, that's the destruction of the Jewish people right there. So, we're trying to bring as many people back as we can, but it's hard because people don't want to listen. They don't want to change, but do these things. I just pointed out a few. I could have highlighted many, many things. Anyone interested, I have an ebook, My Life Story. I told a bunch of stories there, about what I saw that it didn't make sense. Did not make sense logically. So when I left and I said, I have to see the other side, what's the worst case scenario? I wasted a year. I wasted my junior year in college. Okay, right? I took my junior year of college. I didn't get any credit for it. Fine. So it would have been a wasted year. But my eyes got so open, I said, of course this makes sense. I had a million questions, different things I saw, different things I misunderstood. Whatever it was, everything made absolute sense. Within about 2 weeks. It just goes to show when you have the right information, it's like an interlocking puzzle. All the pieces start to fit. Now, you don't necessarily get to where you want to get to. It might take a while to get to where you want to go, right? But in the end, that is a starting point, right? The starting point is, now I know this is false. Now I've seen what absolute truth is. Okay, now I have to tap in. Now I have to see what I have to do, how I have to learn different things. But that's what it means. You have to re-squeegee the brain, right? That's what I'm good at, right? Getting all the garbage out of the brain of what you previously learned, in the Bible and other things that are totally false, and that's not an easy thing. But for a Jew growing up, think, I got all that. I got all that education, 2 hours a week for a couple of years. Come on. I got all this education. Didn't know anything. Didn't know anything about anything. So you got all these ignorant people. They say, the Torah is this, the Torah is that. Probably never gave it a thought, but what they see and what they do just doesn't make any logical sense, at all, for so many, for so many different reasons. So therefore, in conclusion, that I would say these movements don't work. They don't work because they're going extinct. A lot of these synagogues, the average age is about 75. That means they're dying. I once mentioned to my father, I said, Rosh Hashanah, take the gavel, go on the in the lectern, in the bima, and say, my son in Israel says, repeat after me, Yiskadav, Yiskadash. That's the mourner's prayer, right? It's over, right? So a friend of the family said, we're never going to die. this synagogue's never going to die. You tell your son he's wrong. Right? So my father came back to me and he said, this is what this person said. He said, this synagogue's never going to die. 2 years. It took 2 years. They sold it. It was over. Why? Because there are no kids there. You can't pass it down. You cannot pass a feeling down. The only reason Judaism survived is because they learned Torah. That's the only reason. They held very strong to Torah. Learning Talmud, keeping the customs. That's what happened. The further you go astray, even if it's a little bit, you open up a Pandora's box. That's it. There's no turning back. I'm not saying it can't be passed down at a certain level, right? One last example, because I know you're going to throw me out here.
Yeah, this is your fifth last example.
The last thing. Right? The last thing is, I know of a family that they have, they've had a family Hanukkah party for 80 years. 80 years is a big thing, right? Now, if you understand about the Greeks and what the Greeks did to the Jewish people, and all that, and we live in this Greek world, most of the people that are there, the majority of people that are there are non-Jews. So we have a family Hanukkah party for 80 years.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you look at it at face value, because we don't believe in patrilineal descent, I said I was going to get there, I didn't get there, right? Because I know you're going to kick me off now. But in the end, even if we don't believe in that, if the majority people are non-Jewish, which totally defeats the purpose of what Hanukkah is, absolutely defeats the purpose. What's the idea that you have 80? You've been doing it for 80 years. You're right. Then someone shows me a picture. Who's the one lighting the candles? Is a non-Jew. So that's the absurdity. Total absurdity. Oh, what an unbelievable tradition. They're going to say, well, you're talking to me. It's like, oh, yeah, I forgot. You think it's a travesty of a mockery of Shem. Right? Right? Because it goes against the exact thing of what you're trying to do. And if that's the case, you're making a joke out of it. That's what you're doing. So, that's just another example. Wait a minute, I got one other example. No, I'm done.
That's funny.
I got 2 examples. Let me go.
All right, you guys. Well, thank you all for tuning in. Rabbi, thank you for your time. Appreciate it. And we look forward to seeing you guys same time, same place, Hashem willing, next week. And until then, y'all have a great rest of your new week, and we'll see you soon. Shalom, everybody.
חשוב והכרחי להיות ביחד. איפוק זו העוצמה, ויתור זו הגדולה, השאיפה והכמיהה. אני אתה אתם תמיד כולם ביחד. חשוב מכל חשוב והכרחי להיות ביחד.